Hello, dear listener. Welcome to One Voice, One Night. Tonight's tale comes from far away, but it's meant just for you. The rain had been falling for hours. Not hard, not fast, just soft enough to blur the edges of the trees and soften the sound of the world. You had been walking most of the day, boots damp, cloak heavy, eyes searching the path ahead for shelter. The hills rolled on endlessly, their curves disappearing into the fog like forgotten thoughts. And just when you thought the light might fade entirely, you saw it. A cabin. Small, slanted slightly to one side, with smoke curling lazily from a stone chimney. Yellow light flickered behind the windows, warm and welcoming. You stepped closer, heart steadying with every footfall, and knocked gently on the wood. The door creaked open. He was already waiting. An old man, or perhaps something older still, with eyes that held more starlight than reflection. He smiled as though he'd known you would come. "Evening," he said softly, stepping aside. "You'll be wanting a fire, I reckon?" Inside, the air was thick with the scent of peat smoke and chamomile. The hearth crackled with a gentle flame, and a single armchair faced it, worn, comfortable, as if shaped over years to fit only one visitor at a time. You sat, boots off, and he placed a woolen blanket over your shoulders without a word. Silence fell, but not the kind that feels empty, the kind that holds stories. He settled onto a stool by the fire, hands wrapped around a steaming mug, and tilted his head. "You've come far," he said, not as a question, but as a knowing. "And you'll be going farther still. But tonight, you rest." You nodded. "Then let me tell you of the old land," he said. "The green one, the deep one, the place where the hills speak and the stones remember. Ireland, aye, but not the Ireland you know. The Ireland beneath, the Ireland of whispers." He paused, and the rain outside seemed to hush, as if it, too, was listening. Some say the stories are just that, stories. But I've heard them from mouths older than mine, from the wind through the yew trees, from the waves on the western coast, from the stars when they're feeling generous. He leaned closer, voice low. "Do you know of the selkies?" You shook your head, and he smiled, pleased. "Ah, then let me begin." He reached toward the fire and tossed in a pinch of something. Dried heather, maybe, and the flames sparked briefly blue. The shadows in the room shifted just a little, like they were leaning in to listen. And then he spoke, not as a man telling a tale, but as if he were remembering it as he spoke, walking backward through time with his words. "There was once a man who lived alone by the sea," he said. "A fisherman, quiet and kind, with a heart that had grown too used to the silence of the tides. He cast his nets in the morning, mended them by candlelights, and spoke only to the gulls and the moon. One night, during a storm that howled like sorrow, he found something on the shore. Not driftwood, not wreckage. A woman, naked, shivering, with hair like tangled kelp and eyes that held the whole ocean. She said nothing. He wrapped her in his coat and brought her home. And in the morning, she stayed. They never spoke of where she came from. But she sang. Oh, she sang. And the house, once full of wind, filled instead with music. He loved her, and she, in time, seemed to love him. They lived quietly, kindly. The sea calmed. The gulls sang softer. But there was one thing she would never speak of. The seal skin. He found it once, hidden beneath the floorboards. Soft, silver grey, smelling of salt and storms. She saw him holding it, and for the first time her voice broke. promise me," she whispered, "that you'll never take it from me." And he did, and he meant it. But promises are not always strong enough to hold back longing. Years passed. Their child grew, bright-eyed and curious. The fisherman aged. The woman did not. And one morning, the house was empty. The sea was calm. And on the shore, he found the footprints of a seal fading into the tide. He waited every day by the water. But she never came back, except perhaps when the gulls sing too sweetly, or when the waves curl like fingers reaching for a home they left behind. The storyteller fell silent then, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "You said nothing. You didn't need to. Some stories don't ask for questions. They simply sit beside you, like an old friend." Outside, the rain had softened to mist. The cabin felt smaller now, not in a suffocating way, but in the way a blanket feels when it wraps around you just right. "That's one tale," the old man said gently. "But there are others. So many others." He reached for the kettle and poured 2 cups, one for him, one for you. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'll tell you of the fair folk, the ones who dance in moonlight and never walk the same path twice." You nodded, sleep pulling at your limbs like the tide. "Rest now," he said. "You're safe here. The old stories watch over us." And as your eyes closed, the fire flickered, and the lake outside whispered something soft, something only dreamers could hear. The rain had stopped during the night. You woke slowly, not because of any noise, but because of the hush, that perfect stillness just before dawn, when the world holds its breath and everything is soft. The fire had burned low, but the warmth lingered, curling gently around your shoulders, like the memory of a blanket. The storyteller was already awake, sitting in the same spot by the hearth, cradling a steaming mug. He didn't look tired. In fact, he looked as though he hadn't moved, as if he'd been watching over you the entire night, not out of worry, but out of kindness. "You slept well," he said, his voice no louder than a page turning. You nodded, eyes still half in dream. "Then you're ready," he whispered, for the rest of her story. And so he began. It was on the western edge of the world, where the cliffs meet the endless grey sea, that the fisherman lived. His cottage was made of stone, crooked and low, and the roof was patched with moss and seagrass. He had lived there all his life, as his father had before him, and his grandfather before that. He had no one, only the sea. Each morning he would walk the cold sand, net in hand, boots sinking into the shore. And each night he would light a single candle in the window, though no one came to see it, until the storm. It had rolled in fast, waves like black mountains, wind like a scream. He had run for home, barely ahead of the tide, but on the shore, tangled in kelp and foam, he saw something move. It was not a seal, not exactly. It was a woman, pale, shivering, hair like seaweed, eyes the colour of winter. Her hands clutched something tight against her chest. A bundle of soft grey skin, smooth as velvet, heavy with salt. She said nothing. He wrapped her in his coat, carried her home, fed her broth by firelight. For 3 nights she did not speak, only watched the flames and listened to the waves outside the stone walls. But on the 4th morning she whispered, "My name is Maureen." Her voice was like water poured over stone, quiet, ancient. He nodded, and so she stayed. She never spoke of where she came from. She asked for no coin, no promise. She walked barefoot through the heather, sang lullabies in a language the wind seemed to understand. Her laughter came slowly, but when it did, it was bright, like sunlight through mist. They lived simply. They fished. They cooked. They danced, sometimes, when the moon was low and the tide was far. And soon a child was born, a girl, with her father's smile and her mother's silence. They were happy. For a while. But the fisherman had seen the bundle, the sealskin. She had hidden it beneath the floorboards, wrapped in linen and seaweed. He had not touched it, but he had seen it, and he could not forget it. He wondered, would she leave? Could she leave? And then one morning, she was gone. No note, no sound, just the open door and the sea, calm as a secret. He searched for hours, then days, and on the 7th night, their daughter brought him something small, a stone, smooth and black, with a crack running through it like lightning. Maureen's stone, the one she had worn around her neck. The fisherman sat by the fire, alone, and he began to sing her song, soft at first, then louder. The words didn't matter, only the feeling. He sang until his voice broke, then whispered until his breath ran out. And then, just as the candle burned down to its final flicker, she came back, dripping with sea and stars, her seal eyes full of sorrow. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in her skin once more. Not a woman now, not entirely, but not a seal either, something between. She looked at him, and the child sleeping in his arms, and she wept. "I cannot stay," she said, "but I never stopped loving you." And she kissed them both and walked into the sea. Not forever, but for now. The fire crackled gently, and the storyteller's voice drifted off like the tide. You sat still, your breath slow, your limbs heavy with peace. "Some say she returns," he murmured, "when the moon is full and the wind is low. They say she watches from the waves, singing the same song, waiting for the tide to turn again." He looked at you. "Some loves don't end," he said. "They just change shape." Outside, the lake shimmered with dawnlight, and a single gull called softly over the mist. The storyteller rose. "Now rest. There's more to come. The fair folk are near, and they don't wait long. And as your eyes closed, you thought you heard singing, faint, distant, just beyond the water, and the touch of cool fingers brushing against your dreams. The fog had returned. Not heavy, but soft, a light silver veil that curled along the windowsill and drifted like a breath through the cracks in the wood. The lake outside the cabin no longer shimmered. It pulsed, like something beneath the surface had begun to stir. The storyteller sat with a fresh mug of tea, legs crossed, eyes far away. "Do you hear it?" he asked, though you hadn't said a word. "The music in the trees. It's faint, I know, but it's there." He reached for a carved wooden box by the hearth and opened it with care. Inside was a single leaf, dry and gold, veined with silver lines that shimmered faintly in the firelight. "They gave me this," he said, holding it gently. "Long ago, when I was foolish, when I thought I could wander the old woods and come back unchanged." He looked at you then, as if measuring something. "I did come back," he said, "but not all of me." And then, as if the fog itself had opened a door, he began to tell the story. There is a forest in the heart of Ireland that has no name. At least, no name that humans remember. The locals call it the Quiet Wood. Not because it is peaceful, but because no birds sing there. No insects hum. No wolves howl. The silence is too thick, too perfect, too deliberate. They say the trees were planted by hands not quite human, that the roots twist in patterns older than language, that the stones in the forest hum at night, just beneath the edge of hearing. Most stay away, but not all. Once, long ago, there was a young woman who wandered into the forest. She was not running. She was not lost. She simply wondered. She had heard the tales, that the fair folk lived there, that if you walked between the stones on Beltane Eve, they might appear, that if they liked you, they would offer you honey and milk and laughter. And if they didn't, well, but the girl was not afraid. She brought a song. That's what they loved most, the fair folk. Not gold, not blood, but beauty. And the girl's voice, oh, it was beauty made sound. She sang as she walked, soft and slow, a tune passed down by her grandmother. And as she sang, the forest moved, not with wind, with listening. The leaves turned toward her. The moss grew greener. And when she reached the ring of stones at the forest's heart, the fog lifted like a curtain. And they were there, the fair folk. Not tall, not small, not old, not young. They were all things at once, their faces shifting like clouds, never quite still. Their eyes glowed faintly, not gold, not green, just other. And they smiled. They did not speak, not with mouths, but the girl understood. Dance with us. So she danced, and the world twisted. Time folded in on itself. The stars turned in strange directions. Music with no source filled the air, high and bright, then low and wild. She danced until her feet bled, until her lungs burned. And then they offered her a drink, a silver cup, cool as moonlight. She reached for it, but her grandmother's voice, faint and far, rang in her ears. Never eat their food, never drink their wine, or you will never leave. The girl paused, smiled, and bowed. I thank you, she said, but I must return. My fire is dying, and there is no singing without smoke. The fair folk tilted their heads, unreadable, but they let her go. Almost. She ran, fast as breath, fast as fear. And as she crossed the forest's edge, something brushed her shoulder, cold and sharp, a whisper that said, next time, we keep the song. She never returned, but every year on the same night, she left a cup of milk and a slice of honey bread by the window, and the next morning they were gone. And once, only once, she found a leaf on her pillow, gold, veined with silver, like the one the storyteller now held in his palm. The fire snapped gently, breaking the stillness. They're not evil, he said softly, just different. They remember a time before us, and they haven't quite forgiven us for forgetting them. You said nothing, but you could feel it, something old stirring in the corners of the room, not threatening, just watching. They love beauty, he said, and stories, and music, so if you ever find yourself in their forest, don't be afraid. He leaned closer. Just don't eat the food. Outside, the fog began to lift. The sun, or something like it, tried to rise, and you felt sleep pull you downward once more, slow and soft, as though the moss beneath the cabin floor had reached up to cradle your body. The storyteller smiled. There's still more, he whispered. Much more. And the forest, in some far-off place, sang a note that only your dreams could hear. The sky had turned grey again, not from storm, but from time, as if the morning had changed its mind and decided not to arrive just yet. Mist drifted across the lake like an old ghost stretching its limbs, and inside the cabin, the fire glowed low and steady, whispering to itself in the language of sparks. The storyteller had not slept, or if he had He had done so with his eyes open, still as stone. When he spoke, it was without prelude. "There is a sound," he said, "that cannot be mistaken for anything else. Once you hear it, it stays with you, not in fear, in memory." He placed another log on the fire, not because it was cold, but because the flame needed it. "They call it a wail," he said. "But it's not screaming. It's not rage. It's mourning. Pure ancient grief." He folded his hands together. "Let me tell you of the Banshee. Long ago, when the land was young and kings still ruled from stone thrones and torchlit halls, there was a family whose name echoed across all Ireland. O'Connor. They were proud, noble, and beloved. The people spoke of their fairness, their wisdom, their unmatched courage in battle. But the family's strength was not just in sword or law. It came from something older, something quieter. Her. She had no name that could be spoken, but the O'Connors knew her well. She came only when the end was near. Not the end of the world, just the end of a life. She appeared on the edge of the land, where the grass gave way to cliff, and the cliff dropped into endless sea. Draped in grey, with hair like wind-blown silver, she sat on the rocks and wept. Her cry was soft, like the rustle of leaves in the dark, but it reached through walls, through dreams, through time. When a member of the O'Connor line was fated to pass, be it in sleep, in war, or in silence, she cried for them, not out of joy, not to frighten, but to prepare. And always, just before dawn, someone in the family would wake, step out, and find her sitting there, eyes closed, tears like pearls in her lap. She never looked up. She never stayed, only cried, then vanished with the mist one night. Many years later, a young girl of the family, Maeve, heard the cry for the first time. She was only 12, yet her heart knew the sound. She crept through the sleeping house, barefoot across cold floors, out into the pre-dawn chill. And there, on the edge of the garden, she saw her, the Banshee, small, still, almost crumpled with sadness, crying so gently it seemed the world leaned in just to hear her. Maeve said nothing. She simply sat beside her. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the Banshee stopped crying. They did not speak, but the silence between them was soft. When Maeve's grandfather passed that night, peacefully, the family did not weep in terror. They lit candles. They sang his songs. They thanked the woman by the cliff for her warning. And after that, the Banshee came not just as a herald, but as a guardian. She did not cry for strangers, only for those she had known, only for those who had once sat beside her, without fear. Maeve grew old. She had children. She told them, "If you hear her crying, do not run. Go to her, sit quietly, and say thank you." And so they did. And so she stayed. The storyteller looked toward the window, though nothing moved beyond the glass. "She is not death," he said. "She is the one who walks just ahead of it, lighting a candle in the dark, so we are not alone when it arrives." You said nothing, but something within you softened. The quiet understanding of what it means to lose, and to be allowed to prepare. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small bell, simple, rusted. He set it on the table beside you. "It rang once," he said. "When my brother passed, I didn't hear it, but she did." He looked at you now, voice barely a breath. "Do not fear her. When you hear the cry, remember, someone is being loved enough to be mourned, even before they go." Outside, a bird called once across the lake. Not loud, just enough to remind you that morning was still coming, even if it took its time. The storyteller leaned back, closing his eyes at last. Rest now. She's not crying for you. Not tonight. And as you drifted into sleep, you thought, or maybe dreamed, of a figure on the far cliffs, wrapped in mist, singing a lullaby to the tide. The sky above the cabin had shifted into silver, that soft in-between just before twilight. The light no longer came from the sun, but from something deeper, a quiet glow that seemed to rise from the earth itself. You had barely spoken today. There was a hush over the lake, and even the birds that usually called from the trees had fallen still. The storyteller broke the silence. Some stories, he said, are not meant to be happy, but that doesn't mean they're unkind. Sometimes the saddest tales carry the deepest peace because they endure. He looked at you for a long moment, then turned back to the fire. This one is old, older than words, but it has always been sung. And in a voice like falling feathers, he began. There was once a king named Lear, a ruler of the sea, and of many things beneath and above it. He had a wife whom he loved more than the waves, and together they had 4 children. Fionnuala, the eldest daughter, and her brothers, Aud, Fiachra, and Little Con. They were a beautiful family. Their laughter filled the halls. Their joy was a light in the world. But joy, like all things, makes shadows. When their mother passed, Lear was broken. The sea itself seemed to weep for him. But the people urged him to marry again, for the sake of the children and the kingdom. And so he did. Her name was Oif, and she was beautiful, but her heart was cold, and colder still each time she watched the king love his children more than her. She envied them. And envy is a terrible thing when it takes root in silence. One morning, Oif took the children in her chariot, saying they would visit the western lake. The sky was gentle, the air soft, the children sang. And when they arrived, she bade them bathe in the cool waters. They laughed, splashing. And then she raised her hands. With a voice like thunder and ice, Oifa cursed them. By wind and wave, she cried, you shall be swans until the end of time. And they were. Their wings burst from skin. Feathers wrapped their cries. Their eyes, oh, their eyes, still human, still wide with confusion. Fionnuala begged her to stop, but the queen only wept. I cannot kill you, she whispered, but I can make the world forget you. And she vanished. The children stayed on the first lake for 300 years. Through frost, through storm, through endless nights. But they sang. Soft, slow songs to remember themselves. They stayed close, their wings touching, never leaving each other's side. Then the curse moved them to the Sea of Moyle, wild and cruel, where no human sailed, and the sky forgot to shine. There they endured another 300 years. Fiachra once nearly died in the bitter waves. Con lost his voice for a decade. But Fionnuala kept them together. She was their mother now, their lighthouse. And still they sang. When the time came, the curse pushed them westward, to the final sea, Ioris Domnan, where cliffs broke the sky and the wind never slept. There they waited another 300 years. 900 years had passed. The world had changed. The kings were gone. The druids faded. A new people had come, speaking of a god who walked with kindness, who promised peace to those forgotten. And one day they heard a bell, a church bell, soft, distant, from the land they no longer knew. They flew toward it, and there they found a monk, Kaumhog, who saw them not as birds but as souls. He listened to their story. He wept with them, and he welcomed them with open arms. The curse broke, not with fire or storm, but with compassion. And on the shore the four swans turned human again, frail, ancient, translucent, like the morning mist. Fionnuala smiled and said, "We have been lost so long, but we were never alone." They lay down by the chapel, arms around each other, and drifted away like feathers on the wind. The storyteller fell silent. The fire in the hearth had dimmed to a quiet glow, casting long, soft shadows on the walls. "They were buried together," he said, "wrapped in swan feathers, their names carved in stone, and still, on some quiet mornings, you can hear their song, soft as snow, sweet as grief." You said nothing, but something inside you felt still. Not sad, not exactly, just still. "They were children," he said softly, "but they were never lost." He stood slowly, placing a carved feather beside the fire. "Sleep now. We still have far to go. And tomorrow, we go under the hill." Outside, the lake shimmered like silver cloth, and the air carried the faintest song, a lullaby in a language long forgotten. The fire burned quietly. You had stopped asking questions, not out of fear, but because you had begun to understand. These stories didn't need answers. They simply needed to be heard. The storyteller sat, as always, by the flames, hands folded, gaze distant, and when he spoke, it felt like the air around him paused, as if waiting. "There is a hill," he said softly, "in the heart of Ireland. A smooth green rise, nothing grand. Cattle graze it, children roll down its slopes. But deep below, there is a doorway, and it opens only for those who believe it never closed." You leaned in. "The Hill of Tara," he said, "seat of kings, grave of gods, home of the unseen." And with a breath he began. Long ago, before Ireland had roads, before it had cathedrals or castles, it had the Tuatha De Danann. They were not quite gods, but they were not human either. They came not from the sky, but from beyond the mists, a race of luminous beings who brought with them beauty, magic, and a knowledge older than the trees. They walked the land as its guardians, shaping the rivers, singing the mountains awake, taming the wildness into wonder. And then they vanished, not in defeat, but in choice. The Milesians, the people who would one day become the Irish, came after. Warriors, farmers, dreamers. And the Tuatha, rather than fight, stepped aside. They let go of the land above and made their home below, under hills, behind waterfalls, within hollow trees and stone circles, and most of all, beneath Tara. The Hill of Tara was no ordinary hill. It was the place where kings were crowned, where druids whispered the names of stars, where the land itself listened. But those who knew, truly knew, understood that Tara was not just a crown stone of earth. It was a gate. On Samhain, when the veil between worlds thinned, the air around Tara would shimmer, and those with open hearts could hear music from below, harps, flutes, voices that never grew tired. Sometimes a wanderer would disappear near the hill, only to return years later, or never at all. One such wanderer was Ronan, a harpist with silver hair and a laugh like wind chimes. He played for kings, yes, but also for the trees and the rain, and once for a fox he met by moonlight. One Samhain night he sat atop Tara and played a tune no one had ever heard. And the hill answered. The grass parted, the earth breathed in, and Ronan fell, not down, but through. He landed in a place of light, not harsh, not bright, just eternal. The air was thick with the scent of wildflowers and the sound of running water. Around him stood the Tuatha, tall, radiant, draped in robes of mist and shadow. They did not speak, but they listened to him. He played, and when he finished, one of them, a woman with stars in her hair, stepped forward. "You have remembered beauty," she said, "so you may stay." And he did, for a while. The time there was different. A day felt like a sigh, a year like a dream. And one day he remembered a friend he had promised a song. So he asked to return. They warned him, but let him go. And when he stepped back onto the surface, the land had changed. The trees were gone. The village vanished. The stones of the old castle worn flat by rain. 300 years had passed, and no one remembered his name. The storyteller paused. "He played one last song," he whispered, "on the edge of the hill, and then he vanished once more. Perhaps beneath, perhaps beyond." He turned to look at you. "The Tuatha still wait," he said, "not in bitterness, not in anger, but in stillness. They watch us, wondering if we will ever listen again." He stood slowly and walked to the window. "There are doorways everywhere," he said, "in music, in memory, in hills that hum when no one's watching." You followed his gaze, and for just a moment, only one, the grass outside the cabin seemed to ripple, as though something beneath it had breathed. The rain had returned, not heavy, not loud, just soft enough to make the roof whisper and the windows misty. You sat close to the fire, wrapped in warmth, listening to the gentle crackle and the sound of the storyteller pouring a cup of tea. He didn't speak at first. He simply stirred the cup 3 times, clockwise, as though remembering something. And then he said, "Not all magic is quiet. Some stomps, some shouts, some builds bridges across the sea." You looked up. He smiled. "Would you like to meet a giant?" His name was Finn McCool, and he was a giant, yes, but also a poet, a thinker, and on most days, a man who simply wanted to walk in peace without stepping on someone's cottage. He lived on the north coast of Ireland, where the cliffs rise like broken teeth and the wind always has something to say. There, Finn had built a house, large enough for comfort, small enough not to be mistaken for a hill. But across the sea, in Scotland, there lived Benandonna, another giant. Loud, proud, big as a mountain and twice as rude. They had never met, but word travelled on the waves. Benandonna boasted he was the strongest giant alive. Finn, of course, disagreed, and so Finn began to build a path. Stone by stone, he laid them, each one a perfect hexagon, cut with such precision that even the sea couldn't break them apart. They stretched out from the shore like stepping stones for gods, reaching east towards Scotland. He worked by moonlight. He hummed as he built, and after many days, the path reached the Scottish coast. But as he neared Benandonna's land, he heard a rumble, a roar, and then footsteps, big ones, bigger than his. For the first time, Finn McCool felt small. He turned, he ran, and the sea laughed behind him. When Finn burst into his home, breathless and wide-eyed, his wife Una raised one eyebrow. "Changed your mind, have you?" she said calmly. "There's no mind left to change," he gasped. "He's enormous." Una sipped her tea. "Then we'll just have to outsmart him." She dressed Finn in baby clothes, laid him in a cradle, scattered toys the size of carts around the house. When Benandonna arrived, shaking the earth with every step, Una opened the door. "Shh," she whispered. "You'll wake the baby." Benandonna peered in and saw the baby, a full-grown giant snoring gently in a bed of hay. He paled. "If that's the baby," he muttered. Then the father must be... He turned. He ran. Back across the stone path, arms flailing, heart pounding. He didn't stop until he reached Scotland, and just to be sure, he tore up the path behind him, throwing the stones into the sea, scattering them like breadcrumbs in a storm. Today, those stones still stand. The Giant's Causeway, a stretch of perfectly shaped basalt columns, rising from the sea like an ancient staircase. Tourists walk them, children play on them, birds nest in their cracks, and some nights, when the wind is just right, you can hear singing, not soft, not sad, but bold, triumphant. The storyteller chuckled, warming his hands by the flame. Strength is good, he said, but cleverness, that lasts longer. He took a bite from a slice of soda bread, then offered you a piece. You shook your head, smiling. You're learning, he said with a wink. Outside, the wind changed direction. The waves calmed, and somewhere far below the earth or far across the sea, a giant rolled over in his sleep and smiled. The hearth had dimmed, but the warmth remained. You sat wrapped in a thick wool blanket, watching as the last ember glowed like the eye of an ancient being. The rain had faded. In its place was a silence so full it felt like sound turned inward. The storyteller stirred from stillness. There was a time, he whispered, when fire was not just warmth, it was memory. He reached toward the hearth, tossed in a small bundle of dried herbs, and the flame whispered back to life. The druids, he said. They didn't light fires to see. They lit them to remember. The druids were the keepers of balance, not kings, not soldiers, but guides. They walked the space between worlds, not just the realm of men and gods, but between past and future, earth and sky, stone and star. They carried no swords, but they knew the name of every tree. They spoke no laws, but they whispered truths that even the wind paused to hear. And at the centre of every druid circle was a fire, not ordinary, not born of match or spark, but from the heart of the earth itself, passed down in embers, kept alive in oak bowls, fed with sacred wood and silence. One such fire burned at Uisnik, the navel of Ireland. They called it the fire of the centre, and once every year, when the dark half of the year gave way to light, all other fires in Ireland were extinguished, completely. Homes, hearths, temples. Darkness swallowed the land, until at Uisnik, beneath the full moon, the druids lit the first flame anew, Beltane, and from that fire all other flames were reborn, carried in torches, shielded in hands, run through fields and valleys, lit again in every village, as if the entire island had taken a deep breath and exhaled light. There's a story of Braden, a young druid's apprentice. He was not strong, he was not loud, but he listened, and one Beltane, when the wind howled and the skies turned against them, the druid fires refused to catch. The wood was wet, the air heavy. Fear crept into the crowd. What if the light did not return? What if the gods had turned their faces away? But Braden, quiet Braden, knelt in the mud and sang, not loudly, just enough. A tune his grandmother had hummed when the world seemed too much. He sang to the earth, to the ash, to the flame that was not yet there. And then, slowly, it came. A single tongue of light, flickering from a pile of damp leaves, curling like smoke into flame, fed by something older than firewood. And it stayed. The druids watched in wonder. They did not praise Braden. They simply nodded, as if to say, yes, the fire remembers you. And so the light returned that year, and for many after. The storyteller leaned closer now, his face lit by the soft orange glow. They say the flame still burns, he murmured. Not in a place, but in people. Those who carry stories. Those who remember what matters even when the world forgets. He handed you a small coal black stone. Warm. Almost humming. It's yours, he said. Not because you need it, but because you already carry it. Outside the stars began to show, faint, scattered like seeds across a velvet field. Inside the fire burned low again, but it did not fade. It waited. The fire crackled gently now, low, steady, like the tide breathing in its sleep. Outside you could hear the distant hush of the lake brushing against the shore. Inside the air was thick with salt, though no sea was near. The storyteller sat with eyes half closed, as if he were listening to something far away. A memory, perhaps, or a voice lost in the wind. There are stories, he said softly, that drift in with the tide. They stay for a while, and then return to the sea. He looked at you. Would you like to hear one? You nodded, and he began. There was once a man, a fisherman named Donnan, who lived alone on a rocky cove at the edge of the western sea. His days were quiet. His nets always came back full, yet he never smiled. He had known love once, a long time ago, but she had vanished one night without a word, and since then, the sea was the only voice he answered. But on the first full moon of spring, as Donnan pulled in his nets, he saw something caught among the ropes. Not a fish, not seaweed, but a cloak, slick, silvery, soft, like a seal's skin. He pulled it free, shook the salt from it, and tucked it beneath the floorboards of his cottage, not knowing why. That night, as the moon painted the waves in silver, someone knocked at his door. She stood barefoot, soaked to the bone, with hair like seaweed and eyes like stormlight. I've lost something, she said. Her voice was barely more than breath. Donnan said nothing, but he let her in. She sat by the fire, never asking questions, only staring into the flame. He gave her dry clothes, tea, silence, and when morning came, she was still there. So he built her a chair and another cup, and the days passed, slow and gentle, like sea glass smoothed by tide. They never spoke of the cloak. They never spoke of where she came from. But she stayed. They married quietly, had a child, a girl named Mara, who laughed like gulls and danced like foam on the wind. Years passed. The woman smiled often now. She sang to the sea in a language Donnan did not know. But always, when the moon was full, she stood alone on the shore, watching. One evening while playing, Mara crawled beneath the floorboards chasing a pebble. She found the cloak and brought it to her mother. The woman froze, took the skin into her arms as if it were a lost child. Donnan watched from the doorway, and he knew. I'm sorry, he said. She touched his cheek, gently, lovingly. I am too, she whispered, and that night, as the tide returned, she walked into the water. She turned once, not in sorrow, not in anger, but in knowing. And then she vanished beneath the waves. Mara grew. She asked about her mother often. Donnan told her the truth, that love does not always stay in one place, but that it is real, even when it leaves. Every year, on the first full moon of spring, they left a flower on the shore, and sometimes, just sometimes, they found a shell in return. The storyteller leaned back. They say the selkies still come, he murmured. Still fall in love, still walk among us, for a while. He placed a small shell beside the fire. Love, you see, is not about keeping. It's about remembering. You said nothing, You didn't need to. The sea had already spoken. The fire had grown small again, but not cold, just soft, the way a voice becomes when it knows the story is coming to an end. You sat still, arms around your knees, as if afraid to move might break the spell. The room had become something else, not just a cabin, but a place between places, a resting spot between worlds. The storyteller didn't speak for a while. He simply watched the flame. Then gently he said, "You've come far." Outside, the lake shimmered beneath the moon, calm, silver, wide. You could almost see her there, the selkie, still watching, still remembering. You thought of the children of Lear, still swaying in sleep under ancient trees, of Ronan, the harpist, still echoing beneath the hill of Tara, of Finn McCool's laughter carried across sea wind, of Braden, who sang to a fire that wasn't yet born, of every whisper, every footstep, every name that had danced its way into the dark with you over these 10 nights. And you realized you were never just listening. You were part of it now. The storyteller rose slowly, placing another log on the fire, not to brighten the room, but to honor the flame itself. Some say stories are how we remember what the world has forgotten, he said, but I think stories remember us. He walked toward the shelf behind him, taking down a small bundle, wrapped in green wool, tied with a braid of long, pale hair. He offered it to you. "Keep it," he said. "You won't remember every word, but your heart will." You opened it. Inside, a feather, a stone, a shell, a carved bit of wood shaped like a flame, echoes of all you had heard, symbols of things that no longer need to be spoken aloud. The storyteller sat down one last time. He was older now, or maybe you were simply seeing him as he truly was. Neither man nor spirit, but something in between. "Where will I go?" you asked, your voice barely more than a breath. He smiled. "Nowhere," he said. "You're already home." The fire cracked once more, a gentle pop like the closing of a book. You leaned back against the wall. You exhaled, and slowly, softly, the world faded dark, but not empty. Number. It was full of harps and feathers and bells beneath the waves, full of names whispered through leaves, full of footsteps that echo long after they're gone, full of magic, still burning, still waiting, like a fire that never forgets.